Welcome to Amsterdam. This is a home game for me because this is the city that I work in and I teach in. I want you to know that we always have weather like this in Amsterdam, right? So hands up the people who are Dutch, just so I can know what kind of audience we've got here. Okay, so you guys are sworn to secrecy about the weather, right? Today is not only International Girl Day, as I just learned, but it's also International Coming Out Day.
Someone just came up to me and said, please say.
Yeah. So today we remember our friends and family who have faced their fear and done it anyway. That's the definition of courage. So today we listen. You like the title of this talk? It kind of got out of hand. I spoke to somebody about 9 months ago about speaking here today, and they came up with this title, and I never realized that it was actually going to make its way into a slide. But what I'm going to talk about today, I like to call it upside down and inside out. Best practice examples of inducing cultural change towards greater inclusion, equality, and diversity. I am an educational activist, and I'm pleased that Archie was up here speaking about the US earlier. I'm from America originally, and I was born in San Francisco, went to a high school in Washington State, in between two Native American reservations. And I come from that part of diversity that isn't easy to see. In academia, we call it socioeconomically challenged. But it basically means that we didn't have much. And I was so pleased when Archie stressed that in the previous presentation, that this is something that we don't see. And for me, I mean, I went to a high school that literally lost their accreditation the year after I graduated. And for a high school in the States to lose its accreditation means it's really bad. There was a counselor at this high school who came to me and said, apply for university. And I was like, yeah, if I go to university, my parents are going to get divorced or kill each other. And he said, and if you stay, your parents are going to get divorced or kill each other. So get out. Get out. I had one person in my life who said, get out. And I was one of 3 people out of 720 who went to university from that high school out of state. So I tell you that story so that you can realize, you know, I mean, I know we're all facing mountains of challenges in this field, but when the baby steps count just as much as, you know, being able to transform a faculty within our universities. And mentorship programs, one-on-one mentoring of young people really can make a difference. Okay, so I'm here to talk about best practices within the university context. I teach human rights and human security, and I also teach peace building. And that's interesting because when I meet with other chief diversity officers from Dutch universities, most of them come from a psychology or education background, and my background is international relations, and my field is peace and conflict studies. And peace and conflict studies works really well at the University of Amsterdam. And so I'm going to share with you some of the negotiation techniques I've been using since I took on this position 9 months ago. One of them is to ask yourself what's missing. We're going to hear a lot of repeated stuff here today and tomorrow. A lot of things that we all agree with, otherwise we never would have signed up to come here in the first place. So I've been asking myself what's missing and what do we often not hear. And I think that's one of the main messages that I'd like to give you is to ask yourself who is not present and who are the stakeholders who are not here, whose voices are we not hearing, and why are we not hearing them within our own contexts and our own schools. And when we become aware of who we're not hearing, we open up a listening space for them. And alongside that, ask yourselves, what is our own implicit bias? Because we're going to be throwing that word around a lot for the next those words around for the next 2 days, but we all have implicit biases. And when we generate a culture where people can take responsibility for their own implicit biases, then that starts to create a momentum. So it means identifying the people groups who are marginalized, who are spoken on behalf of, who are ignored, who are humiliated, and then asking yourself what's not being said. So you need to see the need. And at the University of Amsterdam, there has been in the past a sort of attitude of, okay, we're the biggest university in the Netherlands, come to us. And I'm trying to reverse that and say, no, 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 we need to go out. So you identify the people that we're missing, the underrepresented groups, the voices that aren't being heard, and then we go out into those communities. And I place myself in a position of humility under the authority of the community leaders, because we want the same things. We want our young people to develop to their fullest potential. And if that means pointing them to higher education, then how can we cooperate in that way? So cooperation is a key word, not going in and telling people this is what you need, because as academics we're so good at giving advice, but it's about being quiet and listening. So I'm going to give you a few tips, and I'm going to talk about some of the practical things that we've been able to put in place at the University of Amsterdam. So the tips have to do with negotiation techniques, and because my background is in peace and conflict studies, I've been using my negotiation skills every day at the University of Amsterdam. You need to identify people's interests. What do they really want? Don't make the assumption that we all want our young people to realize their full potential. I mean, some people just want their research grants, or they want their permanent contract, or a faculty wants more money. I mean, like you were saying in the keynote, that often money is the motor. So you find out what are people's interests, and then you can switch diversity, inclusion, and equity issues, translate them into those interests. So you can say, oh, you want more research money? Diversity is going to help you get those research grants in this way. So you translate it. Another thing is to identify their options. What are the possible ways that we can come to an agreement? And avoid a one-sided focus. Always be stressing different perspectives. Identify alternatives. Maybe we won't be able to get the whole university on board, but we can get one or two key faculties that can be a sort of poster child for the rest of the university, and then we can hold that up to the other faculties and say, look, what they're doing, what about you guys? Identify legitimacy. It's good that I do belong to this group of diversity officers of Dutch universities, but then I can also say I'm in contact with the University of Birmingham about their reporting protocol. I'm in contact with Cambridge universities about their Good Lads initiative. And by bringing in an international network, that also adds legitimacy. And it's kind of a subliminal cue to the people who are still wondering, do we really need this? And when they see the big players already on board, it helps bring them alongside too. Communication is absolutely key. And what I mean by communication is not telling people what you think we need, but listening. I'm caught in a tight spot at the University of Amsterdam because I have a group of people on one side who are pushing for more change and fast. And I have another group of people who are afraid of change. And so you have to kind of negotiate this these dangerous waters in between and try and give when you can, and but make sure that people feel heard. Actually, sometimes that's all that you need, is that people have felt heard, and then you can move forward in another baby step towards a cultural change. Relationship is also key, and what relationship implies is trust. So look for proactive ways to actually build trust and goodwill among the people that you're working with. And commitment. Now, commitment can sometimes take the form of quota or target statistics. It depends on where you are. Right now, I'm telling people I'm hesitant to work with quotas because I've seen how it can sometimes polarize a community, but I'm also realizing that you can have quotas if you put support structures around it. So it's not just a question of quotas or no quotas, but it's about creating a culture of change around that. And people need to be held accountable. So if we have target statistics, so many women professors by this date, so many people from an underrepresented group by this date, and we don't meet those target statistics, then why is that? And how can we make it happen? What needs to happen for that to be met? One example is I'm working with the human resources people at the University of Amsterdam, and we're looking at a whole new way of recruiting and hiring and promoting people, a new selection procedure, sort of loosely based on the way that the Dutch National Police have been working and the UN and KLM Airlines. And we're kind of tweaking it for academia and seeing if it works. But it basically comes down to working with a lot more competencies and defining the kind of competencies we want in the advertisements, and then selecting a different kind of group that actually hires people. So in this way, we reach out to the unusual suspects, and that pipeline that's leaking and that has holes in it might actually come from a completely different source. Another practical thing that we've put into place at the University of Amsterdam is what I call open communication workshops. It's just a fancy, accessible term for talking about implicit bias and aggression. But if I call it an aggression workshop, then nobody's going to come. And this is in place for people in leadership, and we want to roll this out for, not just deans and research and education directors, but also student leaders and heads of student organizations. I mentioned the competencies just to kind of give you an idea of things that you can be working with when you're hiring people. You can look at self-awareness, curiosity, contribution to a community, adaptability, coaching skills, critical and analytic thinking. When you're working with competencies, then you don't have to, then you can be 100% transparent, and you don't have to say to people, well, we needed more women in this position, or we needed more people from a minority background, or we needed more people from a migration background. No, with competencies, people can hold up the they can be 100% transparent and say, I was hired because I have these competencies. And if you weren't hired, then you need to talk to your manager and see if you can develop these. And then there's none of that shame of, oh, you got the job because you're a woman. No, I didn't get the job because I was a woman. I got it because I have this experience. Address bias in an honest way, an honest, open way. Often bias is criminalized, and we're ashamed of it. But if we decriminalize bias, then it stops being the problem that we're trying to ignore or hide or deny. And instead, we've started that very crucial conversation about implicit bias. In Dutch, or in the Netherlands, I think we are giving birth to a racial discourse for the first time in hundreds of years. We literally, in the Dutch language, don't have enough words to talk about racial inequalities in a nuanced way. And often that gets in the way, because then we're talking about one extreme or the other, and it becomes very emotional very quickly. But we are developing that vocabulary in Dutch, and we develop it through a conversation. So talking about our bias in an honest, open way is absolutely crucial. I mean, did you know, for example, that in the Netherlands, there's a bias against short men? So if you have a tall man and a short man and they're both applying for a job, people are going to go for the tall man because they implicitly think he's a better leader and he's more articulate. Now, we live in a country of tall people, so that's one of the things. But I mean, implicit bias is something that plays a role for everybody. Encourage self-reflection. Take a curious rather than a defensive stance. When I'm teaching my human rights students, one of the projects I give them is to go out and find a people group that they feel, or that they wouldn't ordinarily hang out with, and get them out of their comfort zone a little bit. But it's something that needs to happen on a societal level as well, because when we self-reflect, then we realize, oh, actually, I was making assumptions about that people group based on the jokes that my father used to tell, and where did that come from? And you start to dig deep and you start to compensate for these things. There are tools like the Implicit Associations Test, which is online and free, which people can take as a first step in this. Realize the breadth of diversity, socioeconomic, special needs, it goes in so many different directions. Realize the intersectionality of diversity, that if you are a Muslim woman from Sudan and you come here as an asylum seeker, you've already got at least 3 identities that you're working with, because then you've been labeled as a refugee. I think one of the most important things that I'd like to tell you about is in opening the listening spaces, it's absolutely crucial that we listen to the young people around us. My own research has to do with the role of young people in conflict and peace building, agency and voice of young people. And I've found that the students at the University of Amsterdam and also at Amsterdam University College, which is a sub-college of the University of Amsterdam and the Free University, that the students are the ones who come up with the creative ideas. They have the momentum, they have the motor, they have the networks to really get things going. One example is in 2015, when there were so many people with a refugee background coming into Amsterdam. The students at Amsterdam University College were saying, we're meeting some of them at the train station and welcoming them. And they came, and at that time I had a different job. I was in management, and I was heading up a department with 80 lecturers. And the students came to us in management and said, we have to do something about these young people who are arriving. And so we figured out that we could invite them into our classes free of charge, because the lecturer gets paid for 25 students, and if there's only 20, we've got room for 5. And we figured out we could teach them Dutch as well. And we were working with the city of Amsterdam, which is creative, which was great, because there's a law that says that if a refugee doesn't have a status, they're not allowed to pursue education. And so the city of Amsterdam and AUC, we called it an outing, a creative outing rather than education. And since then, it's completely transformed the school. We've had over 100 young people with refugee backgrounds go through the school. And when I was asking where are the women, the guys who were taking the classes said, well, our sisters didn't learn English as well as we did in our home countries, and so now we're also teaching English. But the best part of it is that these students with refugee backgrounds are teaching conversational Arabic to our students. So there's a give and take. And this was an amazing thing that the students got started and then management endorsed. And and it was risky, because people were saying, yeah, you shouldn't have non-status holders in your school. We don't know, who are they? But watch the students, listen to the students, come alongside them. At the University of Amsterdam, there's a group called Amsterdam United, and they have initiated mentoring programs. And I have kind of adopted that within the Chief Diversity Officer program, so that we're mentoring first-generation students, helping them feel more at home at the University of Amsterdam. But we're also now going to be expanding it and looking at the applied science colleges and pointing students from first-generation families to more towards higher education. We have faculty diversity officers now at all 7 faculties. And we have student workshops aimed at raising awareness about preventing sexual aggression and promoting gender equality. This was another student initiative, students who said, how can we get this off the ground? I have on my team students from several different backgrounds, including activist backgrounds. Those of you from the Netherlands will know that the University of Amsterdam was shaken up in 2015 when the administrative building was occupied. And since then, we have an entirely new executive board. 6 of the 7 deans are new as well. And it's it's what we call in the human rights world a window of opportunity, because there's a very widespread willingness at the top level for change and for diversity and inclusion. But it's really a tricky challenge, because it's a tough job, actually, because there's so much to be done. But I'm looking at what the students have to say and then coming alongside that as well. So we've got the homework coach, and we're also looking at Amsterdam city itself and realizing, as Archie said, that socioeconomic differences can point a student in a direction that it'll take years or sometimes even decades for them to get out of. So there's this test that kids take in the Netherlands when they're 11 or 12 called the Cito Test, and that decides which level high school they're going to go to. But if your parents aren't from the Netherlands and don't understand the Dutch educational system, which is very complicated anyway, or if your parents aren't able to sit down and help you with your homework every night, then even if you score well on this test, sometimes the primary school will give you an advice to go to a high school that's lower than the pre-university level. So one of the other initiatives that I'm working on is getting University of Amsterdam students out into the primary schools to coach kids before they take this test. So it's also important to always be looking out, but it is a bit of a tough job, and sometimes I'm misquoted. It's a politicized job as well. There's a report that came out of the occupation in 2015 called Let's Do Diversity, and that's good because now I have a roadmap. But it is a real privilege, actually, to be working with students and staff on all of these issues. I think public discourse is a sign of civilization, and probably one of the most valuable skills we can give our students is the ability to talk with people that they disagree with in a respectful way. Even more important, listen to people that they disagree with in a respectful way. I mean, I originally come from the US, and I've lived now in the Netherlands for over 30 years, and this is my adopted country. But unfortunately, when I go back to the US, I see that in many parts, and particularly where my family lives in Seattle, it's become very polarized. And people say things like, I hate Democrats, I hate Republicans, whatever the group is. But unfortunately, I'm seeing the Netherlands become more and more polarized as well. So it's absolutely crucial that we do, as we work in this field, as we work towards a culture of change, that we understand that sustainable change is what we're looking for. And we have to be able to learn how to listen to people rather than convince people. And if we can listen to them, then we can move forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.